And so the Nephilim are the giants talked about in Genesis 6:4. These are the same groups of individuals that were known as heroes and titans in Greek mythology. I understand there's titans of heaven and there's titans of the earth. The demigods are the heroes. And they're the same demigod heroes like Gilgamesh and the Sumerian Anunnaki and the Anunnaki of heaven and earth. And this is the same story that is told all around the world, and they all have names for these various giants, whether it's in subcontinent of India or Australia.
Bodega is a guide and a storyteller, escorting you through the night, lighting the way, warding off thieves, ghosts, demons, and other oddities. Along the journey, his companions would often share with him the most curious of stories that he'd record in his codex. Perhaps you just might find yourself traveling with a Bodega and sharing one of yours. Click that like. Yeah! If you're new here, subscribe and have the bell hit for notifications to stay up to date on all of the new content. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening wherever you are. This is Rye here, your guide from Codega's Codex of Curiosities. And tonight we have the esteemed Gary Wayne on. I'm really looking forward to this. I've been looking forward to this for months now. So it's a long time I've been waiting, and he has some fantastic insight, and I believe, going to blow your mind on many different things, perhaps give you a different outlook. And, like Tony Merkel always says, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. And I'm sure some people are going to be upset, but that's just the way it is. We have to unlearn so we can relearn. Okay, now a little bit of housekeeping. As always, I want to say thank you for everyone for tuning in, whether you're listening, whether you're watching. And if you're listening, like I say, I have more content in the YouTube channel. So if you swing by and take a look, you're going to catch a lot more. And it'll be very interesting, very enlightening as well. Also, Patreon, of course, $5 membership gets you a shout out and gets you a big thank you. $25 membership gets you some merch. Couple shirts, a bag, a mug, and that helps me keep everything up front. No paywalls. Everything is free. And that's how I can do it, is by you guys, and I'm giving you something back in return as well for your donation. So I really want to say thank you for that. Also, if you're looking to also support the show as well, there's the Codex, Codega's Codex of Curiosity store on Printify. I want you guys to go check that out and see if there's anything you like there. If there is, order it. If there isn't something you like, but you're like, hey, can you make this? Of course I can. All right, and without further ado, let's not keep Mr. Gary Wayne waiting any longer. Hello there, Gary. Welcome to Codega's Codex of Curiosities.
Well, thank you for inviting me to your show, and so happy and pleased to be here. So Looking forward to the discussion, and hopefully that your audience is going to raise more than one eyebrow as we go through some of the topics that we'll likely talk about. So yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be a good ride.
I am looking I am looking forward to it as well. I really, and if you're listening or watching, and if you have any, if this makes you think any bit, make sure you write in the comments, say, this blew my mind, or this upset me, or this, we want to hear all feedback, because it's all about having that discussion and raising awareness and making you think a little bit further, and to dig a little bit further, a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I'm a Christian contrarian, and for people who maybe not sure what that means, and I get asked it a lot, so I like to get it on the table fairly quickly. And basically, it means that I don't accept what somebody says, and I don't accept somebody says what is written somewhere. I like to verify things for myself, because and I mentioned that not only as I sort of publish myself as a contrarian, and it's not that I'm not going to be standing against a lot of the standard dogma, because I do my research
Hmm.
and I try and do it very, very detailed. But it's that aspect about raising curiosity and learning and digging deeper into things, and that's really what I like to do with the information that I deliver, because we need to understand, and each of us is on our own sort of quest, however you want to describe quest, path, spiritual, um, adventure, however you want to call it. And we're all at different levels, but you need to learn about where we came from, where we are, and where we're going, and make your own decision as to why you believe what you believe. So I'm not here to convert anybody as a Christian. I'm here to provide information and hopefully connect a lot of dots for you.
I think that is all one can ask for, and I couldn't agree more with you when you're saying that we shouldn't blindly believe. We should always verify. We're given information a lot of times. It's kind of like, believe this or trust this. It's on TV. You gotta watch it. No, and I will find, I mean, sorry, I'll say in the last like 4 years, we've been told that doing your own research is not. No, you're not supposed to do
Yep.
your own research. You're not supposed to think for yourself. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, this is ridiculous. I feel like I'm back in elementary school or high school when people are making fun of you for reading more and learning more.
Yeah, that's usually the flag that you should have to dig into something more when they say the debate's over, or whatever the shut the conversation down statement is.
Yep.
Just say, hey, no, that's just a tactic that they've been well taught to do,
Hmm.
because they have people respond the way that they want way more often than not. And they just take the power, and they're trying to take that power away from you. And that means they're controlling you. So if you want to be controlled, that's fine, but know you're being controlled. And if you don't want to be controlled, you need to find out how they're doing it and how to push back against them.
Yep. I could not agree more again. That's exactly it. It's, you have, if you're fine with being controlled, then go ahead, but
Yeah.
you got to know that you are, those trigger words, those phrases that they use. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. Now, Gary, for for our listeners and our viewers who don't know who you are, of
Yeah.
course I do, and I know I've talked about you a bit to a couple of my friends that I said I'm having Gary Wayne on, and they're pretty excited. But maybe some of our viewers and listeners don't. So why don't you give them a brief recap, and then tell them where they can find you as well.
Yeah, so I've written two books. The second book just came out. So the book is called The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. It's part one and part two. And the first book is subtitled How the Descendants of Giants and Secret Societies Plan to Enslave Humankind.
Hmm.
And book two, in response to Christians who wanted me to go where nobody has gone before in the Bible and in a depth level that hasn't been done, they wanted me to write a book for Christians on kind of the same topic, because book one is kind of getting people, it's a 6,000 year investigation, A, into the House of Dragon, and B, to sort of reveal to people, Christian and non Christian alike, that there's a common history, a hidden history that's talked about in all cultures, and it's talking about the same events. It's the same things that rolled forward that has affected our history, the same forces that are controlling the world today. So it helps you understand the world today and knowing where we came from. And they also have the same ideology for an end time. They just have different outcomes. And basically, the differences will be a polytheist lens or a monotheist lens. And
Mm.
if you think there's a secular lens, then you need to read book one, because you're going to find out there is no such thing as a secular lens. So it is a polytheist lens. You just have been misled. So, and
Fair
again,
enough.
whatever you want to believe, but you should know why you believe and who is pushing those belief systems and how far do I trust them. And so
Mhm.
book one is designed to show Christians how, and I'm a Christian and I write with a Christian biases, but
Mhm.
when I'm using outside biblical sources, I let them speak for themselves.
Okay.
I don't want their words manipulated. I want to quote them, and I want people to check out the veracity of what I say they said, and then and so the idea was to show Christians for sure how the Bible intersects with the world we live in, both
Mhm.
before, today, and moving forward. Book two is a little bit different. It's how the world intersects with the accuracy of the biblical history.
Okay, okay. Which I think there's many, especially different
Yeah.
ancient cultures as well, who talk
Yeah.
about the same type of events that have happened, and
Yeah.
people just kind of brush it off.
Yeah. So I'll just do some shameless self promotion. That's book
Of
two.
course. Okay.
And so it's got a seal on there and a scroll. And of course, it's got, for the Christians on that seal, it's got 7 trumpets and 7 bowls or goblets or grails. And the other one has a dragon seal on it for book
Interesting.
one. Yeah. So yeah, so I've written 2 books. They're both bestsellers. Book two is a bestseller right out of the gate, and my book one gains more traction every year. It's been out for probably 9 years now, eight
Mhm.
to 9 years, and it sells more books every year than it
It
did
just
the year
keeps picking
before.
up, just
It
keeps
just,
picking up.
yeah, yeah, and it's really designed for people that if you're not wanting to go deep into the Bible yet, you read book one. But either way, you can read them separately, and I
Mhm.
try and read it and explain it so that people can sort of follow along. And they're large books. So book one is 98 chapters,
Wow.
over 800 pages, and the other one's a little shorter. That's all I promised, 760 pages. And 84 chapters and 98 chapters. But each story is a mini story. So you
Mhm.
can, if you want to go to the Rosicrucians, there's a chapter on the Rosicrucians. If you want to go, learn about the sons of God, there's a chapter on the sons of God. If you want to know a chapter on Atlantis, and both books are designed that you can read it at your own pace, because the information is dense. And I try
I
and
could
make it
I could
interesting.
imagine.
Yeah. Try and make it interesting and compelling, but
Mhm.
you just can't speed read it. You have to absorb it because there's so much information. And so people tend to use book one as a reference book to go back to. And I've had people read it like 7 or 8 times because they just learn more about it. So yeah, so it's, if you're not familiar with Genesis 6, I think your audience probably is,
Yeah.
and they're probably wondering what the conspiracy might be. Um, Although I do put it to a certain degree in the subtitle. And book two's subtitle is How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps to Define End Time Prophecy. And I'm really, and people say, like, why do you have to have such controversial titles? I'm trying to whack you on the head to grab your attention,
Yeah.
because if you can get by the name, when I think it's a great name, but if, some people just say anything Genesis 6, I don't want anything to do with. But if you can, you're going to open up a world that you always sort of thought was there. You just
Mhm.
couldn't put it together. So, yeah, so that's who I am, and I go on shows quite regularly, because whether it's Christian or not, or non-Christian, because I can talk as much about the occult as I can about the Bible. So in my learning to write book one, which was way longer than I thought it was going to be, I had to learn about, when I decided I wanted to do more than just connect Genesis 6 with the end time, I had to learn about the things that I thought I already knew, because I was a real fan of history and mythology. So I understood the stories that were being talked about in Greek or Sumerian history, and other cultures around the world were telling the same story. And I wanted people to understand that. But I thought people need to understand the context of the culture, and the religion is the culture. and everything sort of stems out of that. And so then I had to learn about all the different religions, and then I learned about the mystery schools that were taught to the elite, and then that the secret societies began before the flood, and through the mystery schools that come out of the seven sacred sciences that were the founding basis for the mystical religions. And so then I had to go down that rabbit hole for about 8 or 10 years, and you could stay down those rabbit holes forever because it's absolutely endless. But to be able to get enough of an understanding to try and even attempt to put that in with all of this other kind of information and not have it just a train wreck of a story. So
Yeah.
it took me a lot longer to write that book. It only took me 2 years to write the second book, but I had pretty much all of the research materials. So
Of course, of course. Now, I don't even know where to start. I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, giants. Giant slash Nephilim. I find fascinating, intriguing, because it seems to be something that just gets swept to the wayside. It's been written about. It was in the Bible, but even ancient, even the like native cultures, they talk
yeah,
about giants all the
yeah,
time, and they just like, oh, it's just stories, that's all it is. But when you have multiple cultures that are completely separate talking about the same, more or less the same thing,
yeah.
that is intriguing. And especially when they keep denying it, of course makes you, just like we were talking earlier, it
Yeah.
makes you want to question it more. That's a red flag.
It is, and it makes no sense. And I would say you could get the mathematical zero, as in I know about infinity, but there's a point where you have to have a zero factor in understanding of that, and that's probably 1 in 3.5 to 4 trillion in that zone. So,
Exactly.
but to have a flood story in every culture around the world on every continent that includes giants, that includes the same type of gods. And it's the same religion, just different vernacular names. To have little people, fairies and such, on all cultures around the world, things like Yeti and Bigfoot, same thing, pyramids. And you get with this endless sort of list of things that all have the same story that they're telling, the source, the events,
Yes.
and you cannot dismiss the almost impossibility of that taking place and not be connected. And why deny parts that seemingly fit perfectly into the complete story? They want to talk maybe about the pyramids. Don't want to tell you how the technology was there to build it.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
may want to talk a little bit about the mystical religions and the different pantheons. They
Yeah.
don't want to tell you who these people are. They're the figments. The best they can do is tell you it's the figment of their imagination that they had to create these things, but they certainly didn't create the knowledge to do the things that we're just catching up to do today. And
Exactly.
and so if we're just catching up to them, then we really need to understand a passage in Ecclesiastes 1 that talks about that there is nothing new under the sun. What was will be again. And as you read further into it, about verse 17 or 18 in there, it talks about that you need to also understand that having this kind of understanding and wisdom leads to grief and sorrow. So
It's
everything
true.
that's happened in the past is cycling through again. And it has been trying to cycle. It just hasn't come to a level of fruition that it's going to do again. And if all of that is true, then all of that technology that we're just catching up to today is going to be there. And the giants are going to be there somehow, some way. And the gods are going to walk amongst us again. Now, how you want to define what you're going to be seeing or the history of that is, I understand that. Um, but again, there's nothing wrong with, from a Christian perspective, to listen to the History Channel on the ancient aliens. They do
Yeah.
extraordinarily good research. They have an extraordinary sense to wrap it up with a biases and a manipulation to fit their puzzle. But the research before they do that editorial is excellent. So, but it's talking about the same story as what's in the Bible, and that's the thing that we need to focus on.
I I agree. We have like these separate we'll say like scientists. We had, or these, archaeologists, and they're studying their own thing, but they're not able just to connect the bridges between it all. They're not, it's like I'm only studying this and I can't really see further than just this little box that I'm in. And when you take a step back and, you're able to see the connections and, like you're saying, what is, it's everything is just all connected.
Yeah.
It's the same.
And one of the critical questions to ask to start to understand things is, who are the royals? What makes them royal?
Let's please do that, because I'm Canadian, so of course we're still in the monarchy,
Yeah.
and I would love to cut that off. I don't want to be a subject to the monarchy at
Yeah.
all. Yeah, it really bothers me, actually. So, what are the royals? Who are the royals? What makes them royal?
Yeah, and we just witnessed a ancient ritual with the crowning of King Charles III, formerly Prince Charles. And this is a ritual that goes back to shortly after the flood. But it's a ritual that's based on what was done before the flood. And so the Nephilim are the giants talked about in Genesis 6:4. These are the same groups of individuals that were known as heroes and titans in Greek mythology. I understand there's titans of heaven and there's titans of the earth. The demigods are the heroes. And they're the same demigod heroes like Gilgamesh and the Sumerian Anunnaki and the Anunnaki of heaven and earth. And this is the same story that is told all around the world, and they all have names for these various giants, whether it's in subcontinent of India or Australia. And so this ritual begins with the Nephilim with their great size. They're going to take over control. They're going to set up royal dynasties. And so they're going to partner with the polytheist religion, and they're the offspring of the gods, the offspring of the fallen angels. The ancient definition for demigod is the offspring of a god or a goddess and a human male or female. I mean, it was a common understood doctrine around the world, and that they took complete control. In fact, Atlantis is the great empire of the ancient world with 10 kings, sons of Poseidon, as the mythos goes, that he would have inherited from his parent god Iapetus,
Okay.
and Clyto. And Iapetus in the original version was the daughter before the flood, Clymene. But parent gods and offspring gods get conflated because offspring gods inherit the mythos. So I don't want to get the audience, if they're not that familiar with antediluvian or pre-flood history, I don't want to get them too confused with too much detail. But so he had, Poseidon in this case, had 10 offsprings with a human female. There were the 10 kings of Atlantis that were destroyed by a flood and other conflagration events. It's the same story told all over the world. And they ruled the world. And then after the flood, you have giants reappear, whether or not one believes they survived the flood somehow on the earth, off the earth, in another dimension, on another ark, however they might have done that, or they were recreated. I tend to side more for a recreation of the giants, as I explain in book 2. But I'm open and still leave a crack open to them surviving, because we don't get a smoking gun verse. I think it's close to one, but it's not enough for me as a contrarian, so I leave that crack open. And so you have Rephaim giants that are after the flood, and they're going to do the same thing. They're going to usurp control shortly after Babel. They're just waiting for the people from Babel to come out, and they're going to take over them, and they're going to be the royals. So I call these dynastic bloodlines Rex Deus in book 1, kings of God. It's a Latin term, and one of the titles that they like to have. And that in book 2, I cover royal as being Old French king, and coming from Latin like regalis and regal, and to rule out of Indo-Aryan, the language of the giants. And I explain the language of the giants in book 2. And So you have this word king with this suffix al, which is a transliteration of el. And el is the Hebrew word for a god, uppercase or lowercase, like the God Most High or the fallen angels. And you get transliterations in other languages like il and ilu and words like that, but al as well, as in Baal, which means Lord God or Lord Master or Master God, depending on how you want to put those words together. And
Interesting.
these are kings of God, and they receive their divine right to rule from the pantheon of the gods, from the assembly of the gods that I talked about in book 1, and then bring that back more biblically to the assembly of the gods at Mount Hermon, particularly through the Ugaritic texts with the Baal and the Baalim assembly of the gods. And underneath that, you have their assembly of the Detanu. And these are the kings. These are the giant offspring of Raphael and Raphael and Anat. Just like El, the parent god, who mysteriously disappears. And they say they killed him, but you can't kill something immortal. So that's kind of not
That's
really saying where they
how it's,
are.
yeah.
He, they went to the pit prison for their crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so Baal and the other Baalim gods, and there are other Baalim gods that are listed in the Ugaritic text, like, Emer and Karat and all of these different gods of the assemble. They all create giants. Rephaim giants, and this is the word RPM in the original Semitic, and this is the Rapiu or Rapium as it's transliterated, which is the root word for Rephaim as it comes out of Semitic, right?
Okay.
So you get these nice parallels where you can transfer the words and get the root source meanings from.
Okay.
And these were dynastic kings of
Hmm.
the assembly of the Tanu, just like the assembly at Nippur of the Ring of the Lords, or the Lord of the Rings, I'm sorry. And it's the same story all around. And it's interesting about the languages that the T and a D were pretty much interchangeable around the Middle East cultures and in most of the languages. So you might see Ditanu, Ditanu, ANU, show up as Dadan or Dadanu in Hebrew. But you would also might see that show up as Tadan, reversing the T and the D, or Tadua, as in sort of Mesopotamian giants,
Oh, wow.
as they're
Okay.
described. And then you could put two T's together and you'd get Titanu, the word for Titan, because the U is just the basic language suffix that they end with,
Yep.
which is the Titans of Greek mythology and the giants created in the same sort of way. So this is the Tuatha De Danann. This is the tribe of Danu, both before and
Wow.
after the flood. These are the connections that you start to get into as you start to see the commonality in the world. And so they would receive their power from the specific celestial mafia godfather, a fallen angel or a god, so
Mm-hmm.
that they would receive the divine right to rule and all the authority. They are the visible ones on earth for the invisible ones who rule. And they both have their own assembly. So when you see in Psalms 82 for Christians, the council of the gods, that's the Baalim council that is being referred to. And they rule over the 70 nations that are recorded in Deuteronomy 32 and numbered by the 70 nations listed in the table of nations in Genesis 10 and First Chronicles. And that this was the same number of nations as numbered by the 70 sons of Adam before the flood. So there's constant. And then Israel numbered by their sons as part of what I call a dual prophecy that they will fulfill in the millennium. And that number 70 is counted by the nations in Genesis 10 and by Exodus 1:5, where it says Jacob had 70 sons in
Oh,
Egypt.
wow. Look at
Yeah.
it.
So you start to see how things sort of start to tell a common story. So when you saw
Exactly.
King Charles III
Yeah.
swearing an oath to a god, it's not the
Which
God of the Bible.
exactly. Yeah. Which God? Which God?
Yeah, his patriarchal God. and his
Hmm.
loyalty to his patriarchal uh, Nephilim or Rephaim bloodline, and or scioned in bloodlines to ennoble that bloodline. They try and keep those bloodlines as pure as possible because that's where they fit in the overall royal hierarchy, in the top two classes that they created, that they use to oppress the whole earth throughout our whole history. And that humans were allowed to populate the third class in a small number of entrepreneurial, importantly required skill sets of being a tailor or a baker or things like that. And the rest were basically the slave class, the working class, and or the sacrifice class, but it's all the same class, right? And that's the same system that was established all around the world, and for most part of the world is still in effect to this day. And we would know that in the West as the feudal system that they actually still impose. We just don't see it as visibly imposed. But understand the royals believe they're the descendants of Rephaim and Nephilim and the gods, and that they keep their genealogies in place so that they can substantiate within their culture where they fit. And they would create, and they created these coats of arms, and they would be in ancient times on flags. And you get these really weird imagery on the coat of arms. You know, you get unicorns on there, and you get lions, and you get eagles and dragons, and
Yes.
these are all representatives of their celestial mafia godfather. If they've got two of those really weird things on there, like a lion and a dragon, they're basically saying that the lion is one of the heads of a cherubim watcher.
Okay.
And the dragon is the serpent face of a seraphim watcher angel.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I always wondered about the coat of arms, because they're so far out there, and you're like,
Yeah.
where did you come up with dragons and unicorns? Like, how
Yeah.
did that ever come into being?
Yeah.
How did you know how to draw that, and where did that come from?
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
fascinating.
I explained that heraldry in book 2. I didn't get there in book 1. I mean, it was only,
Only so much.
it was only
800
800 pages. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, and so they would be able to fly that banner as they rode into other countries, and the royals there would know exactly the taciturn language that was being communicated and treat them accordingly. Now, they also had rivals, so they might treat them as a powerful rival that they may want to assassinate, because the culture of the giants is war.
Okay.
And to try and wipe humankind from the face of the earth. And they were created for that purpose, so that the fallen ones wouldn't get blood on their hands. And they use there's more than just the Nephilim as the spurious offspring, but they use them to try and to destroy things. So if you go back to before the flood, we talk about this great technology. We understand about the violence, whether it's Atlantis warring and trying to take over all the nations of the earth. It's a common understanding, and we get this violence that is only looked at superficially in the flood story, where the giants have their creation story as the preamble and the context for the flood. They caused the violence. Now, if we understand that they had a higher technology than what we have today, and that we can't build the things that they built back then today, then you might want to sort of take that and say that if we're still catching up, then that means they had the ability to destroy the world.
Okay.
They were created to destroy the world, including humankind, and not to reach our destiny. Adamites were created as the resolution to the angelic rebellion. So if we start to understand that, and we understand that the fallen angels know how powerful God is, you can understand why they'd like to see humankind not reach their destiny, so that they would be convicted for their crimes. But they use their spurious offspring to do it. Now, when we start to sort of understand that,
I have a question though before we go too far, Gary. So maybe a statement, or I don't know if a question, but if we're saying like the fallen ones don't want to get blood on their hands, Is that perhaps why Switzerland itself is considered neutral? Because they're like, we're not getting involved in anything. We don't want to get the blood on our hands. And, there's a lot of strange occurrences going on in and around Switzerland.
Well, they don't want to have war in Switzerland.
Hmm.
It's the perfect place to place all the off the market, off the books money that the royales control. So people look today at, let's say, Gates
Yep.
or Elon Musk and say, oh, they're the richest people in the world. That is chicken feed to what they have. So when I was doing research, and it's hard to get good accurate information, but I did get some points where I could triangulate on it, is that it was estimated, and this was 2000 to 2001, 2002, and when I was trying to
Hmm.
figure out how much power and money that they had, because when you look at, like Nostradamus prophecies,
Hmm.
this wealth comes out of nowhere in their version of the end time. That's not answered as to where it comes from, and nobody really knows about it that can fund the wars and the things that they need to do. So I thought, well, I want to find a little bit more about that. I'm not sure I follow everything that Nostradamus says. It's not easily read, that's for darn sure, and I'm not sure it's always interpreted properly either. But there might be something to that. So, and then when I learned about the Knights Templar as being the first bankers, um,
Okay.
they established the banking system there through the Knights Templar, where the Hospitallers had already settled and took in most of the wealth out of France. Some of it went to Scotland, but most of the big wealth went to Switzerland. And then when they got control over the Vatican banking through Francis Borgia, Grand Master of the Montesa uh, order in Spain, that was created by the King of Spain to make sure that the Vatican didn't get the Templar wealth in Spain.
Hmm.
Um, that that order inherited all of that wealth, and then in early 1500s, in the 1520s, there's a Francis Borgia, part of the black nobility Borgias. His
Okay.
grandfather
Okay.
was one of those popes
Yeah.
who's he's in the court. He's a royal Basque, and a very high pure bloodline, and why it got him in so much trouble, the Basques, and why you have the diaspora, but that's another rabbit hole. um, what he does is he starts to fund Ignatius of Loyola, because they need to put the Templars back into the Roman Church. And so he gets them out of jail. Then he, with his connections and his money, he gets a papal bull. They get control of the education. He joins the Jesuits and becomes the third Grand Master in 1565. And by 1572, with working with the King of Spain and invading Italy, they get control of the Vatican banking, and then they move it to Switzerland. And then the Rothschilds have got their banking there now too. They were created as banking outside the Vatican Church, and uh,
Wow.
so that they made sure they had control. So, anyways, back to the estimate. So I was told at that time that they had somewhere between 300 and 500 trillion back in around 2000.
Wow.
So you can only imagine what that number might be today, and that might
Ex-
be underestimated, right? I mean,
of course. Of
yeah,
course. I would assume so. It's going to be underestimated. Yes.
yeah. So when people say, well, why would there be a great reset? Well, it's an interesting plan if they can pull it off through the Davos crew that would report into the Committee of 300, if you want to know who they answer to in the secret society order on the
Of
Philemon
course.
tree.
Yeah.
um, is that, people like, let's say, Bill Gates and Musk and these people, they would lose everything as well.
Hmm.
But because they're part of working with these royales and the secret societies, they get two things. One is that their future generations will be able to intermarry
Okay.
and have a higher place. And then secondly, they'll be the oligarchs that are funded by the royales after the Great Reset, and once they have control of all the land again, because in the Great Reset, all the land goes back to the government the way the kings used to have it, right?
Yeah.
Is to
You
take
own
it back.
nothing and you'll be happy, right? Isn't
Yeah.
that the
And
yeah.
if you have money in the bank, you're going to be fine. It's the people who don't have any debts. They're going to take some of that to pay for some of it. They're going to take all of it.
Yep.
So you're not going to be able to pay your taxes. So you're going to be renting too.
Yeah.
And so the oligarchs who lose their money before the reset will make their money so fast afterwards that they'll be looked after and their generations would be looked after. So, yeah, so we need to understand that the world is run by the visible ones that still take orders from the invisible ones.
Yes.
And it's at play in everything. So I'll leave that in because I know we covered a whole bunch of material there. And
We have, yes. But
oh, I was
I
just going to say, oh,
mhm.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, just to give an idea how you can know that they have their genealogies. If you ever read Lawrence Gardner, I mean, he's one of the genealogists and he's dead now, but he has books on their genealogies. But King Charles III, but when
Yeah.
he was Prince Charles, and I have a link if people want to get hold of me, I can send it to you. He's on record twice as saying that his genealogy goes back to Vlad the Impaler, the character that Dracula was based on. All of this is
Yes.
connected. And Vlad the Impaler, they take their genealogies back to the Agrazi tribe of Greece.
Okay.
And that's one of the tribes that Hercules founded,
Wow.
son of Alchemy, the human female, and Zeus, the god.
Hmm.
And that's part of the Herculides bloodline. And there are many of those branch bloodlines of the giants going back to a specific celestial mafia godfather. This would be a post-Diluvian bloodline. And that if you're familiar with the Gyges kings, the Tyrannos, the Torwanos of Assyria, like with post-Diluvian gods named like God named after antediluvian giants named God. So kings, they would take the names of antediluvian giants, as Gilgamesh does in the Epic of Gilgamesh, as a post-Diluvian giant versus Gilgamesh of the Book of Giants of Enoch before the flood. And so these are part of the Herculides bloodlines. And so this is part of the genealogy that King Charles has on record. And it goes back to the Hanovers, who have two unicorns on their coat of arms. And that bloodline comes through intermarriage of the royal families in Middle Europa. And to give one more thing on how cozy this is, even though they'd like to overthrow each other, World War I was a war of cousins.
Really?
Yes. So the King of England uh, and Victoria before that were cousins with the kings and queens of France, with the kings and queens of Spain, with the Italy ones, the Kaisers, the Habsburgs, and the
Hmm.
Czars. They were all part of the larger family of royal bloodlines, but
Jeez.
rivals.
Of course, of course. It makes sense. We always think it's so separate, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's all connected.
Yeah, so you get little tidbit of it. They'll say, my cousin King
Yeah.
Wilhelm in Germany, they mention it, but they know most people don't know the history, don't
Hmm.
go looking for the history, and they know they can do things in plain sight because they have prepared us well. It's not that we're stupid. They think we're stupid,
Yeah.
but they have been able to prepare us through the education and the
Hmm.
culture and through all the other pressures that they can put on to accept things, and we just ignore things like why you have all of these rituals going on in plain sight. Why is everything named after polytheist gods and using
I
polytheist architecture?
I agree. I agree totally. We've been, you know, I don't know, trained just to not question and just, oh, this it's just art, oh,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean anything, it's just, openings for these Olympics. Oh no, no, that's just a form of expression, and that doesn't, it's not related. And yeah, and as soon as you question, you're ridiculed, and a lot of people don't like that, so they will just keep silent and they'll stay with the mass of
Yeah.
people watching TV and brain. I don't want to say brainwashed, but some people will just say that they are convinced otherwise.
Yeah, you go onto a university campus, they're using architecture from Egypt or Greece or Rome, all the beast empires, right? And it goes back to, and it's structured in a system that they're teaching you knowledge, and understand that polytheism is a knowledge cult, right? Gnosis meaning knowledge, for Gnosticism, and it's the love of Sophia, philosophy. Sophia is the wisdom goddess and the queen of heaven, mother goddess, that the theology, which is philosophy behind the seven sciences, and that on the campuses that you're going to earn degrees. The mystical religions have degrees. Third degree is an adept, just as in secret societies in the old system. 33rd degree is the more latter one in the West, but that's just, dividing each degree 11 times. Another, prime number that they like to use, or sacred number mysticism on, and it all has special meanings for them. And then you're going to graduate wearing black Cathar robes.
Right?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's because that we don't understand where the seven sciences came from. And they called it in history the seven sacred sciences. They now called the seven liberal arts, and in antiquity, arts and sciences meant the same thing. So the seven sciences, according to the Freemasons and the Polychronicon, which is their original oral history, that if given out by the adepts, the punishment was death.
Wow.
Yeah, it was that powerful with knowledge. But in that history of humankind that they keep in secrecy, is that Adam was taught a lot of things in Eden, and they accept certain things out of the Bible, which is why they had the King James Version Bible written. They needed something to swear an oath on, because it's an oath-based system, mysticism, based on Harum Anathema by the 200 on Mount Hermon. And that's the beginning of the oath-based system. And the mystical religions are tied to the fallen angels. So anyways, back to the beginning. Adam has to learn to run a huge piece of property between the Nile and the Euphrates River to Mount Hermon in the north, and down to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba and the waters on the south. And if you get into the Hebrew of the languages, it's talking about orchards, it's talking about fields of grains, grasses. It has all of these animals. There's ranching going on, and there's just him. And then God relents and gives them a partner, and one more person to operate this whole land. So the Gnostics believe, and the secret societies believe, he was taught all of this knowledge from God on how to do this. And then when he's ostracized, he taught it to Cain and Abel, but Abel gets murdered by Cain, and then Seth is born later. And that Adam passed the knowledge on to his sons. And then that Cain decided to use the knowledge for his own gain and passes it on to Enoch, his son. And there's two Enochs in Genesis, if people aren't aware of that. And they like to conflate the two. One is the first son of Cain, and the other one is the son of Jared. Son of Jared is the holy one. Son of Cain, not so much. And he takes this knowledge and he puts it into the seven sacred sciences that will later merge with the knowledge from the fallen angels that takes the antediluvian world to a level of technology we're just catching up to. Now, that knowledge, understanding is put into a religion to protect it from the mundane, the Sethites.
Okay.
Right? And later, any human, for the most part, who doesn't have the bloodline after the Nephilim are created. And so they create the mystical religion. So Enoch, son of Cain, and I cover this off in detail, he creates the sun-worshipping bull cult of the antediluvian religion. It was Enochian mysticism. It's the same religion that was used at Atlantis. And it's the same religion all around the world. And this is the religion that's going to cross the flood. Now, they're going to teach this knowledge and keep it secret from the mundane, but only to the elite. So they have to set up mystery schools. And in the mystery schools, all the elite are taught the various seven arts, and they go into whatever disciplines they're going to go into, and they control the religion, they control the education, they control the army, they control the money, and they control the governments, right? So they control how history is written. And so in these mystery schools, they set up secret societies to develop certain disciplines, whether it's medicine or engineering or architecture. And so the seven sacred sciences is in the mystery schools is where the intersection that the secret societies and Gnostics say secret societies began with those initiatory secret societies, which you still have today with all of these beta houses and alpha houses, and that's the same ideology in the same locations. And so,
Fascinating. Like tying this all in, you're like, you never question, oh, why are these frats? Like these, the the alpha and the beta
yeah,
or gamma. It's
yeah,
like interesting. Okay.
yeah, and that's why you have in the Ivy Leagues you have things like Skull and Bones, right? Because you're moving into more of the elite sort of aspect of secret societies. So it's important to sort of understand that this is the same religion that crosses the flood in their belief system. And four patriarchs that they mention that are biblically mentioned as very, very high. Obviously, Enoch, son of Cain, but also Lamech's sons. And Lamech is talked about highly as well. Two Lamechs. You got to remember that in the genealogies. This is the
Okay.
Lamech of the Cain side. And he has a son named Tubal-Cain. He has a son named Jubal and Jubal, and then a daughter named Nama that are mentioned in the Bible. They are looked upon very fondly in the secret societies as their patriarchs. And what they do when they know the flood is coming is they're going to put directions to where they're going to hide the knowledge of Enoch. Hidden in 9 vaults, 36,525 books stored in these vaults, buried under the Great Pyramid that they used his knowledge to build the pyramids with. This is their belief system, and we don't have legitimate accuracy to who built the pyramids in secular history.
Yeah.
And they like to date it to 2300 BC to Khafra or Khufu. But the interesting thing is, in the reign of secular history, which is for the flood, is about 2950 to 3050. The King Menes or Narma, same name for the same king, has this stela that shows the 52-degree slope of the Great Pyramid in the background.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. So I mean, plus anytime they've ever done any datings, that goes way beyond 2300. It was renovated after the flood. Short, and the
Exactly.
dating is perfectly biblically for just after the flood. Why would you renovate it? Because you had a flood that probably damaged it. So
Yes.
makes perfect sense. So Lamech and Enoch, depending on which version you're getting out of that Masonic history, they're going to write on 2 pillars, one that will survive an apocalypse by fire,
Okay.
and one that will survive an apocalypse by water, because they're not sure, or they don't want to be deceived is probably more likely, the directions to where this knowledge is. And so a fellow by the name of Harmine, as we would understand, as it's recorded in the Polychronicon, but we would know him as Hermes, as part of the Hermes Trismegistus. This is
Okay.
a post-Diluvian Hermes. And again, I explained the Trismegistus in book 1. He finds the pillar, obviously the one that floated versus the one that wouldn't float, and goes and gets his knowledge from the pyramids, and he takes it to an interesting fellow named King Nimrod,
Wow.
who uses that knowledge to build Babel City and Babel Tower in their version, and who knows what else, which brings about the Babel incident about 100 years after the flood. And this is that Enochian mysticism religion that is baked in there as well, with all of the rituals and the history. And the religion that Nimrod imposes on all the Noahites as the first post-Diluvian, and notice I said first post-Diluvian versus antediluvian, Antichrist archetype. And so he imposes this mystical religion on all of the Adamites, the Noahites that survived the flood. And you need this dispersal so that that can't come to a fruition before the ordained time in the end time. So if you look at that word, the Babylon religion in the end time, that goes back to the Hebrew word Babel.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the religion we need to be keeping our eye on for the
Okay.
universal religion of the end time. And that God did this. He does intercede to make sure that all the names written in the book of life from before creation have an opportunity to be born on earth and have a choice to leave their name in the book of life or have it blotted out. So that's why things continue until those names are fulfilled. It's
Okay.
the commitment that he gave. And people look at the God of the Bible from the polytheist side and they say, well, it's such an evil God that would bring on the flood. Well, he did that. If he did that, and I'll qualify that in a second, he did that to intercede so that there'd be a restart because the whole world was corrupt, including the plant genomes and the DNA. And I can go into that later if you want, how you get there with that word corrupt. You have to take it back to the Hebrew for the meaning. Um, and he's providing a restart so that everybody whose name was put in the book of life is going to have that opportunity, because the world's going to be destroyed by violence and fire, and just like it will be in the end time. And then the polytheists and the seculars say, well, the God of the Bible would be evil to kill everybody on the earth. Well, I also remind people that in polytheist cultures, it's the gods of the pantheon who bring on the flood. So pick your poison, but be consistent, please. So it doesn't matter to me who brought on the flood. Did God bring on the flood, or did he permit the fallen angels to do it?
To bring on the flood.
Yeah.
Yes.
And basically the fallen angels basically said, or the gods just basically said, in some versions, they're too noisy humans, or they're too violent, or they're too this. And so they decided they wanted to destroy them.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So again, we don't get that sort of version on if the flood was true.
Yeah.
And it's only the evil God did it, and that's the God of the Christians, right? So, but I understand there's a different lens to view it through, and that's why you need to go through the facts. So this is where Nimrod becomes the first grand master of masonry after the flood, and he writes the first post-diluvian constitution for the Masons.
Okay.
And all yeah, and all of this knowledge and secret societies are going to continue down through the generations. And Nimrod, after Babel, he's going to actually intermarry with the Elamites, which are giants. And you've got Shemites who are thought to be Elamites, and I don't think you'd have two names of the same. One either the Shemites took the name of the giant Elamites, or vice versa. I haven't been able to determine which, but there is secular history that says there was two people who merged to become the Elamites. So we have humans and we have giants, and that's word Elam goes back to Olam in Hebrew, which means ancient and old. And these are the Ben Kadim, the sons of the East, the giants of the East, part of the Datanu assembly in the Ugaritic text. And this is the bloodline that Nimrod is going to intermarry with. And then he's going to, renovate Uruk, which we understand biblically as Iraq, and a number of other cities. And this is the dynasty that 3 generations later, Gilgamesh is going to be born to, Lugalbanda, king of Uruk, and Nin, the queen of heaven, mother goddess, fertility goddess, to produce Gilgamesh.
Holy cow. That is so much.
Yeah, I tend to string a whole bunch of stuff together.
No, but you tie it in nicely. You tie it in very nicely. Wow. Okay. And I had a question from a while back. You said that they wrote, the King James Bible. Let's go to the King James Bible so they could swear an oath on. What Bible would you recommend? What version would you recommend would be something that might be a little more truthful and less convoluted?
Well, I don't think how the Bible was written really affects a significant amount of the KJV.
Okay.
And I have issues with all the translations. So,
Okay.
and the reason why I have issues with the translations is I use 6 different Bibles to see how they translate it, but
Okay.
I take it all back to Greek for the New Testament and Hebrew for the Old Testament. And so there are translations that are dubious. And if you look at what happens in the time of King James, he's the first king of England as a Scottish king of the Stuarts. And he likes to call himself the mighty King James, mighty Hebrew word Gabur, Gibborim, giant, royal bloodline. And he has, he made famous the divine right to rule. But he is going to associate with a fellow by the name of Francis Bacon. Now, Francis Bacon is a Rosicrucian, and he is mentored by John Dee, and he becomes the most powerful person next to Queen Elizabeth in that empire, and then becomes the second most powerful person after Elizabeth dies with King James. Now, he forms two writing societies, and he's a great writer himself. I have a great couple of documents on this if you want. Actually, I have documents on a lot of things I talk about. So if people get a hold of me through the website, name the document or the subject. If I have a document, I'll send it to you. It might take me 2 months to get back to you, but I will do it, and I do not charge for that. So he creates two writer societies to create a new language, a new English language that is being imagined for this universal world empire. And he wants this new English language to be the language of the world. So he creates two writing societies. One's called the Knights of the Helmet, and the other one is the Spear Shaker Society. And the Spear Shaker goes back to Apollo, and I'm trying to think of the female goddess that went with her. Starts with A.
Artemis?
Athena.
Okay.
And she had a spear shaker, and they were sort of partners, right? And she would shake the spear. Well, if that name sounds familiar, William Shakespeare was part of this writing society. And where you start to see why people start to make connections, was he just a front for Francis Bacon? Whether that's true or not, I mean, there's a lot of good information to suggest that. But the point of the matter is Francis Bacon runs these societies, and he's creating this new language, and they're writing literature in the new language that is in place for the KGV to be written when Masonry is introduced to England with King James. And and people say, well, that's a fraud, where he's being shown as being, knighted as an adept in this parish in Scotland. It's for show, yes, but he's a royale, so he's initiated from childhood. He's an adept before he's an adult. He's not even allowed to take an adept title until he's beyond 25, between 25 and 30. They are so far beyond first level adept in Freemasonry. To do it, it's just for show, right? It's for publicity. And so you have this introduction of Freemasonry into England. You have a new king into England, and you have this new Bible, and it's there to unite the empire, because all the different religious factions, like the Puritans and the Catholics, and now the Scottish religions coming down with King James, they're all at odds with each other. So it's designed to unite the empire, kind of like what Constantine did with Christianity in about 300 AD. So anyways, Francis Bacon is going to be the last editor of the Bible for the translations. And that's when I think you start to see some manipulation. So you have the most obvious one is the unicorn. So you have this word, that unicorn, that shows up in the Bible. It doesn't show up in other English translations. And the Hebrew word is rem, means a wild bull, not this cuddly, cute little horse, not this horse that was a chimera both before and after the flood. That was a giant horse used by the Nephilim and Rephaim kings to go into battle on, with a horn the size that could kill a charging elephant.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, okay. So this is the word, and understand that the Stuarts have a unicorn in their coat of arms, which doesn't, it's part of that heraldry of that horse, but it also goes back as an allegory in the occult to a cherubim. I won't go into the detail of that. It's in book 2 if people want to get that, because it takes a while to explain. And so you have wild bull being substituted for unicorn that's on the coat of arms of King James, and it's associated with Mount Hermon and with world empire, as with Ephraim. And he's going to begin the assault of the world to make the Commonwealth the empire of the world. where the sun never sets, right? And so you have this really interesting connections, and that he's part of the bloodlines that are a rival, one of the many rivals, there's at least three at any one time in Europe, that will present an antichrist figure at the right time. Now, what's interesting about the unicorn as well, when you get into biblical prophecy, you have this little horn that grows up amongst the 10 horns in Daniel 7 of the end time empire. And then you have this little horn in Daniel 8 that is talked about. It's a single unicorn. And so that's been purposely written in to bring those allegories together. So expect a unicorn kind of allegory to be associated with the Antichrist pedigree, which is probably going to be a descendant of the giants from wherever the Antichrist comes from. And so this is a book that is going to have certain words inserted into it as markers. So, for example, you're going to have Jehovah Elohim translated as Lord God. Well, you remember what I said about Baal.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And I understand not using Jehovah and Elohim, although they used it when Moses took down the Torah. So that was something that sort of came in while they were in Babylon, in the diaspora at Babylon of the southern kingdom. And so you could pick something better than Lord God for those words.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
then they say, well, Lord in Hebrew means Adonai or Adon, Lord, and Adonai, my Lord. And so it can be, and it is used in reference to Jehovah or El Elyon as the Father at times. But Adonai is also who the Gnostics look on as the true name for the God of the Bible, who's just another angel and would be equivalent to them like Adonis, right? And I cover
Okay.
that off in book 1. So they're using their word plays to get their meaning in there. And just so that people understand, Jehovah, it's Jehovah of the Elohim as we would understand it. And El Elyon is part of the Elohim, just as Jehovah is, just as Ruach, the Spirit is. So in the New Testament, it's said better. It's called the Word of God, the Logos of Theos. It's the same thing as Jehovah of the Elohim. Theos is God, Logos is the Word. And when God spoke in Genesis 1, that's the Hebrew word Amar. That's why the Word creates all things at God's command, his Father. Like, it just makes sort of perfect sense, but they've molded up with their own words. So I see them out there in social media just driving Christians crazy and driving wedge issues, saying, hey, you basically call your God Baal. And then they throw the meaning of Baal at them.
Super fascinating. Wow.
Yeah. And I won't go through all. I'll give one more.
Yeah.
And there's lots, but but it doesn't really change the whole meaning. It's just markers for the people who understand, and they can use that against it. There's one real interesting passage in the New Testament, along with the translation of Mount Zion as Sion, Sion, which is like the Priory of Sion. And Mount Hermon was one of its other names in the Bible as Sion. And they use the French transliteration, and they're two different words. Sion for Mount Hermon and Zion for Jerusalem are two different Hebrew words. So they're using Sion all through the New Testament instead of Zion. I mean, again, an interesting play that marks the Priory of Sion, which was the senior order that formed the Knights Templar.
Okay.
And then split away in 1188 at the cutting of the elms because the Templars lost their way and lost Jerusalem. But back to the story. So the other word is in Acts 12:4. It says Easter. Easter is Ishtar, Ashtaroth, the queen of heaven, the mother goddess. And I say, why is that there? Because the Hebrew word is Pascha for Passover.
Passover.
Yeah. And they translated that as Easter. None of the other translations do. They translate it as Passover. because that's the Greek word for Passover out of Hebrew. But we get this propaganda that comes down, and people just going to nod their head and say, "Oh yeah." And what the story is on that one that they've sold to Christians is that the Jewish people, after Jesus was crucified, became so polytheist they celebrated Easter, not Passover. I'm going, oh, isn't that very interesting? A few short years later, after the crucifixion, that they're also polytheist that they don't celebrate Passover anymore, but they continued all through 2,000 years. Oh, but that time they had converted to
Just right then.
polytheism. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have scripture for that? No. Okay. Well, what are they doing then, celebrating a polytheist festival, Easter,
Hmm.
if and because they wouldn't therefore obviously celebrate any other feast of gods? Well, they'll nod their head, go, yes. Well, then why in 12:3 were they celebrating the Feast of Unleavened Bread,
Mm,
which follows the Passover?
of course. Yeah.
I mean, but people will buy anything if you tell them that. And,
Yes. Yeah.
and the mother goddess is a essential constitutive doctrine of polytheism. That's why
Okay.
it's there.
Uh, Fascinating. Wow, Gary, you are full of so much information. Like I would love to have you back sometime late in the year when you're
Yep.
not as busy, and we can review and we can jump into your second book a little bit further too.
Sure. Yeah. So after September 15th for
Yeah.
video.
Yeah.
So book soon because I only do audio over the summer.
Okay.
And by the time I get back, I'll be booked through to Christmas.
No problem. No problem. Yeah, I was already actually pre-booking some other people for November and October already. So
Yeah.
I definitely will. I'm gonna definitely send you an email
Yep.
and hook you up for sometime around then.
Yeah. So one of the things that for people that are out there is, and I know we're probably running a little bit overtime here. I
That's
just
all
want to
right.
leave people with one other thing. Don't let people say giants weren't giants.
Mhm.
I mean, we have in accounts all around the world dimensions of these giants. Gilgamesh, 19 feet tall, 11 cubits, royal cubit, 21 inches. King of Uruk, 19 feet tall, 7 feet wide. Ogsbed was, as king of Edrei and Ashtaroth, it was 9 cubits and 4 cubits wide, so 7 feet wide and um, about 16 feet long. So he would have been somewhere between 13 to 15 feet.
Wow.
These are giants. Goliath was 6 cubits and a span. King of Gath, he'd be 11 feet 3 inches. If you use the common cubit of 18 inches, it's 9 feet 9 inches. And so don't let people say that they were like 7 or 8 feet tall. The
Yeah.
giants were true giants, and the antediluvian giants were even bigger.
Wow.
Now, there were hybrids after the flood, as I talk about in book 2. They're 7 to 9 feet tall. They're
Okay.
interbred between humans and giants versus humans and
And
gods and fallen
fallen
angels to
angels.
create
Yeah.
so different type of hybrid. And that was out of necessity that we don't have time to talk about today. So people then go back and say, okay, even though there's records like the Egyptians on the Shazun, you can cite all these other records, then why does the definition for Nephilim, because they don't even know what a Rephaim is, so they'll use Nephilim,
Mhm.
it include bully or tyrant. So
Mm.
why wouldn't you just, for these mighty ones in Genesis 6:4, where they could have been just bullies, just
Yes.
warriors, right? Well, that's part of the meaning, sure, as is giant and a tribe of giants. But do you know where those words are sourced from? I mentioned one earlier, just as the lords of the Philistines go back to the Gyges kings that were called Tyrannos, and Anatolia, and the Hittites or the Anatolian Tarwanas. These were the Tyrannos kings because they were tyrants. That's where they were vicious things. Now, the word bull is a word that is used to describe the Ugaritic gods like the Baalim, the
Mhm.
Sumerian gods. Gods all around the world were called bulls, and they were strong and wide, and there was a whole bunch of allegories that went with it. But so were their offspring. So I provide those accounts in book 2, where the tribes of the Tanu, the giant tribes, were also called bulls. And so these were tyrannical bullies and giants. It's giving you the fuller meaning. It's not an and or in that situation. So
Yeah.
don't let them use terms and or superficial statements. Dig into it and challenge them back, because they're part of the propaganda machine, or they've been so brainwashed um, that they just can't sort of get rid of that cognizant dissonance to try and say, maybe I should look at this a little bit more, because I just don't want to believe that. It's like in the Matrix, um, where what's his name, uh, I'm trying to remember the character that wants to go back.
Cipher.
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 I was going to say
Mhm.
crypto, but it's Cipher. He just wants to go back. He doesn't care whether it's fake. For me, I like to know what the world is really about,
Yes.
and so that's what my books explain.
That is amazing. Yeah, like I've been saying, as a personally as myself or like humans in general, we are explorers. We always want to explore more and find the truth. But I think some of us have just been, you know, um, you know, misdirected or whatnot. But I believe that we're all still explorers and we're still exploring the truth. We want to find that truth. Whether it's discovering new land where there very much could be land that we haven't seen for quite thousands of years. But it could also be that we're trying to discover the truth. We're trying to explore the truth, and I applaud what you've done, Gary. I think it's amazing, and your work is something that should be celebrated.
Well, so a lot of people do, a lot of people don't,
Yeah.
but that's fine. But I get a lot of email and stuff that comes in, and it warms my heart to hear people say, for the first time, the Bible makes sense, or the Old Testament makes sense, or you've made the Old Testament come to life. Every detail in the Bible is important, um, and it does not contradict itself. And I start to show in book 2 how you can use the uh, Hebrew chronology, starting with you know Anu Monday for the time of the flood.
Hmm.
And um, in book 1, I use the secular version for the timing of the flood. Book 2, I use the biblical one, and it starts to take away the conundrums that secular history has. When they have an extra 600 years inserted, it just doesn't make sense of a lot of the history that people would have, particularly in Greek history, where they're going to move the Trojan
Yes.
War down to about 1200 BC. I did a couple of shows with Greek hosts and saying, like, why tell us what your version is, because we can't make sense of our own history that they keep telling us. And I'd say, well,
Yeah.
that's because they're trying to match your history up with the dynasties of the pharaohs and the Sumerian kings, and they've inserted about 600 years through additional names of kings, because they had up to 7 names. Yeah.
Interesting.
And,
Interesting.
and then you move, and then they said, well, yeah, if you move Troy back to about 1800 BC,
Mhm.
that makes perfect sense. And then that makes sense with the first giants that are created, like with Hercules, and it just
Yep.
everything starts to line up. So um, it's one of those things where once you learn that the Bible can tell you so much about what you need for yourself, but also the world that we live in, and you can go out and see it once you understand the Bible. But it takes a little bit of work to go back in and read about the Bible. So, and if my books help people to do that, I mean, that I couldn't ask for any more.
Fantastic. I appreciate that immensely, Gary. And of course, when I go to talk, we got motorbikes driving by, but I really appreciate that, Gary, and I really appreciate you giving us your time. And one last time, where can we find your books? Where can our listeners and viewers find your books?
So the best way to get a hold of me or to find my books is through my website, and that's the Genesis 6, the number 6 conspiracy.com. On that website, there's a contact the author. So if you want to know a little bit more about Nimrod or some of the things I've been talking about today, if I have a document on it, just name it, and I will send you that document. Or if you ask me a question, I will answer your question. Do not send me a video to watch. I do not have time. I won't even look at it. I'll just move on to the next email. Sorry to say that. I just don't have time to analyze everybody's videos that they send me. I probably get 50 a week. So
I,
there's no way I
I,
could do it.
I can imagine. I get a couple a week, and for me, I'm still like I'm
Yeah.
busy enough that I try to watch them, but
Yeah.
it's difficult.
Yeah. And if you wanted to find out what was in my book, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1, all 84 chapters of book 2. So you just go about the book, click on, and just the table of contents in each of the books is going to grab your attention. And you're going to see names of giants in book 2 as title chapters that you've never heard of before. Or if you have, you may just haven't realized it when you read through the Bible that they were talking about giants. And if you wanted to get a signed copy from me, you can go over to the buy now page and click on book 1 or book 2. They're both the same price. So if you wanted to order book 1, order book 1. And if you wanted to order multiple copies, you can. There's discounts for that. I haven't been able to get Stripe to and my web writer to get it bundled, to cross bundle. But if you wanted, let's say, buy one of each and get the 2-book discount, just order 2 of one, send me an email and tell me you want one of each. If you want to buy 4 books, say you want 3 of one of the other, order 4 books of one, send me the email and I'll sign it and address it to anybody that you want. And if you wanted, and on both of those buy pages, if you wanted to link over and get the digital version, you can link over and get the Kindle version from Amazon. And you can also link over to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com from the buy page. And I have a buy page for Canada, I have a buy page for the US, and I have a buy page for anywhere else in the world. And yes, I do supply books all around the world that are
Awesome.
signed. And down the road, in about 2 months, we finally got a deal done that somebody is serious about finishing the project to do an audio version of book 1. That'll be out, and I'll have connections on my website on that as well. And then book 2 will be done 2 months after that.
Awesome. That is fantastic to hear. I I'm all about audiobooks. I find I find it so much more easier to walk around listening to my
Yeah,
audiobook as I'm doing my mundane tasks and
yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's a high cost book to do for what was thought to be a small market size, but audio has grown significantly.
Yes.
And then other people that did take it on, they just said it's just too difficult. We can't do it.
Uh,
Um, we can't do all the different pronunciations of different names and things. And so,
I'm
and then,
I'm interested in who did
yeah,
it. I have a good friend who has their own podcast as well,
yeah,
who does audiobook readings as well. So I
yeah.
don't think it's them, but
Yeah.
he
So
would have been.
the audio version will be done through Amazon and through
Yep.
ACX.
Yep.
So it'll be available through there. There was a book that came out that I didn't even know about it. I put the nix on that right away. I took one listen to it. Somebody had negotiated with my publisher to do a AI Genesis 6 conspiracy, and they
Oh
wanted to do book 2. I'm going, I don't want to be associated with AI. And then I
no.
took one listen on it and I'm going, no, you know, I,
Yeah.
I want out of this. I don't want my book done in AI. So they agreed to take it
Agreed.
down. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. No, that is good. That is good. Thank you so much, Gary. I want to say thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure listening to you. It was really my pleasure.
It's been fun. Hopefully we raised a few eyebrows tonight.
I hope so. I hope so. Thank you so much, Gary. All right, everyone. That was Gary Wayne with. I don't know where to go from there. So many. It went deep. It went really, really deep. And if you're lost, don't worry. Buy his book, read his book, and you won't be lost. If you're pissed off about a couple of things he was talking about, buy the book, read it, do your own research. That's something I can't stress enough is always continue to, ask those questions and look into things. It's all right. It's all right to ask those questions and to always be questioning. All right. That was amazing. And as we come to the end of another chapter and we can see the shadows lengthening and hear the darkness whispering its seductive lullabies, let us remember to keep our hearts pure, as they are a beacon against the approaching night. They are a symbol of our unwavering resolve. Until we meet again, may your curiosity always wander, and may your light remain lit. And finally, may you always find your way home.
I look forward to our next adventure together as we navigate the mysteries that lie ahead. Until our paths cross again, keep your curiosity wandering and ensure the light remains lit.